Hi, my name is Thomas Lassourd, and I'm an senior economic analyst at the Natural Resource Governance Institute. And I focus particularly on issues of taxation and fiscal regimes for oil, gas, and mining industries. So for this week of the MOOC, I'm going to answer a few questions that have been asked based on this week's lecture on fiscal regimes. So I start with the first one. It's about the question is how far are a nation's sustainable development important for foreign investors? So I'll try to first look at it from a decision to invest perspective and into the fiscal regime. So in terms of the first short answer to this question is that the sustainable development of a country doesn't, strictly speaking, matter for an investor. But then I'll nuance my answer. It doesn't matter because for a decision to invest in a particular mining or petroleum project, investors are going to first look at the commercial viability of the project and whether they can get a good return by investing in that project. So that includes the geological properties of the project, the cost of extraction, the probability of finding enough resources, and the fiscal regime. So what are the fiscal terms that a country imposes for the extraction of that resources? So that should be altogether, if you look at the business model and the financial model the company will use, should give the company a number, an net present value of what the project will yield, or other indicators such as the internal rate of return of an extractive project. And that's supposed to be that's in general the minimum an investor is looking for. That said, more and more in many contexts, and for more and more investors, the sustainable development of a country becomes important for several reasons. The main reason is that a company needs a license to operate, a social license to operate in a country. And so if a country doesn't really benefit from its resources and if development is not happening, it might generate frustrations from the population and local communities in particular, which might disrupt the activities of the company. So if only for the selfish goal of having a project that lives harmoniously within a country and its communities, a company will need some form of local benefits and economic development happening in the host country. Second reasons I can think of is that for many extractive companies, having strong local content is also benefit. So a country that develops from mineral or petroleum resources is going to have better, more qualified labor force. It's going to have better service providers locally, and that will allow the foreign investor to lower its costs by hiring these local employees in these local companies, which in general cost less than the equivalent foreign labor and subcontractors. And finally, a third reason, and that's a more long-term perspective in terms of foreign investment, is that as the host country develops sustainably, then that creates a bigger domestic market for whatever resource the company is producing. So, for example, if a company is producing natural gas, and then if there's more economic development in the host country, then there's more demand for that gas domestically. So that might create additional markets for the foreign investor. So that's a more long-term perspective, but it's also, I think, a valid reason. For all of these reasons, I think major investors, especially for mega projects in the extractive sector that are going to last for a long time, have a vested interest in the sustainable development of the country where they're operating. So that was for the first question. The second question is about, I was asked for examples of sustainable stories, and how that could illustrate some of what has been said this week. So I think the question was a bit general, but I'm going to focus it on the aspects of taxation in particular. So from a taxation perspective, I can think of, let me separate first. In terms of petroleum producing countries, I would say that in terms of strong examples of sustainable partnership between countries and investors, you have such examples as diverse as Norway, Angola, or Malaysia, that all receive a large share of the revenues generated by foreign investments in those countries. And maybe more recently, the example of Mexico opening up to foreign investors are also fiscal terms that are very favorable to the country. And the key feature, I think, of all of these countries is that to allocate petroleum rights, they use auction, a system of auction where they take an open bidding where investors can bid on the technical part of how they will develop the petroleum project, and also on the fiscal part, so how much they're ready to pay the state for the use of those resources. And in general, that aspect of auctioning petroleum blocks is a very good practice to try to for governments to try to generate the most revenues from their resources, because through a bidding process, if it's transparent enough and there's enough competition between operators, then it's very likely that the winning bid is going to reveal the maximum that an operator is ready to pay the country for the use of the resources. So it's the maximum the country can achieve from that resources. So that's very good practice, and I would say that would be an example of a good story in terms of partnership between foreign investors and countries in terms of taxation. In the mining sector, auctions are not as common. Wherever feasible, we recommend them as well. But other countries that have sustainable fiscal regime, I would quote Chile and Australia, have very different regimes, but they both work very well for these countries and generate substantial revenues. And a characteristic of these two regimes is Chile and Australia, mining fiscal regimes, is that they're relatively progressive, which means when commodity prices, in that case, copper or iron ore prices or gold prices are low, then the government is going to collect relatively less revenues from this project, which is going to help these projects be more sustainable from the investor's perspective. But then when the commodity prices are high, when mineral prices are high, then these countries capture a greater share of the windfall and the revenues generated by these projects, which is better for the government, because then it's neutral for the company because it still capture enough of the rent to generate to justify its investment, but then it's better for the government because a greater share of the revenues in terms of high prices is being collected by the country. So I would say that that's on the mining sector. That would be the kind of example I wanted to mention. And if I take a step back and to look back at the question on insisting on the word sustainable in the example, I think from a larger perspective, fiscal regimes are more sustainable when both parties to mining or petroleum contracts receive equitable shares of the resource rent. So not equal shares, but shares that correspond to how much investments they have in the project and how much they expect to gain from these projects. Otherwise, without a fair share of the mineral or petroleum rent, then there is more pressure in the country to renegotiate the terms of the deal, which means it's less sustainable and it's more prone to disputes in the long term. And then I recognize the question also could refer to larger issues of sustainable development in resource-rich countries. In that case, I would like to refer you to the next few weeks of the course, which are going to look at the spending aspect of resource revenues and examples of diversification as well. So stay tuned for a few more weeks, and there will be more to say on that respect. The third question that I received was about the Africa Mining Vision and the role of UNECA in supporting model contracts and contract negotiation. So, I mean, I work for the Natural Resource Governance Institute, but I know UNECA, who's doing great work, mostly implementing the Africa Mining Vision and helping different members of the African Union implementing the Africa Mining Vision in their domestic policy and legal frameworks. I think that's the main focus of UNECA, but I know they also work on a number of more tailored support. So I encourage you to look at their website and contact them to know more about the particular support that this organization provides. But if I take from the questions a couple of elements that I think are very relevant to this week's lecture on fiscal regime. The first one is on the model contracts. So model contracts are a really good feature of countries that have a contract system, because with a model contract, that applies to all all projects. Let's say it's a mining model contract. So if you have a model mining contract or model mining agreement based on your country's legislation, then that means when the country agrees on the contract terms with the different companies, it will be the agreement. It starts from the country's model contracts and not from the company's model contracts. So the terms should be closer to the country's mining law and to the country's interest. And if ideally you would leave only a few terms to be tailored to a specific project in the model contract, and most of the terms should be set in stone. So that facilitates the negotiation with the company because there are less terms to negotiate, and it guarantees more coherent, more consistency between the different contracts that are going to be awarded. If you're looking for kind of like resources to look at model contracts, it's a bit limited because each model contract should be country specific, depending on the country's law. So you don't have a general model. There is one example that's could be a basis for a reflection. It's been developed by the International Bar Association, and it was called the Model Mineral Development Agreement. So there's a website, Model Mineral Development Agreement Projects.org, and you can find that it's a very thorough document, and it's very useful if you're especially from the government in a resource-rich country, looking at different ways to adapt the legal regime for investment. You could also look at for specific examples of contracts, contract terms. You can look at the website resourcecontracts.org, which is also created by the same organization that created the MOOC. So you have hundreds, thousands of contracts to look at. That could be good resources for a resource-rich country. And finally, if you focus on Africa, there is a website called the African Mining Atlas, the Mining Legislation Atlas, which is a repository of all mining codes in Africa. And that's also can help you to compare manual legislation from one country to another and specifically look at fiscal terms. And going even further in terms of the idea that it's better to set fiscal terms, legal terms in general and fiscal terms in particular, in general legislation and in a model contract than negotiating everything specifically contract by contract. I'd like to mention the example also in Africa of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The country has done a lot of mistakes in terms of mineral management of the mineral sector. But there is one feature that's interesting for our perspective on the fiscal regime, is that there is no since the mining code was passed in 2002, the country is not negotiating individual contracts with investors. Now, all the new mining projects in Congo can apply for a mining license. And once they have a mining license, they are supposed to operate according to the terms of the mining code. And those are the same terms for every company. So it makes it very clear for investors what are the terms that are going to apply to them even before they start prospecting in Congo. And it makes it easier for the government of Congo to manage the different obligations applying to companies because the obligations are the same. So it's something that's really good practice. And then there's less effort to put into negotiations of individual contracts, so it saves human resources for the government of Congo as well. And when it's time to change the law, which is actually one of the debates actually happening in the DRC, then the government has to go through a process of revising its mining law, and it's long because it applies to all companies, so all companies are interested. So there's a lot of discussion between the mining industry, the government, civil society takes part in the discussions. But once this process is finished, then the new law applies to all contracts, and there is no need to review each contract individually or to wait until the contracts are expired so that the new mining law can apply. So it's a really good feature, and I recommend thinking about that aspects rather than always focusing on the contracts themselves in terms of fiscal regime. And so the last question I've received was about bilateral tax treaties and what is meant for the taxation of extractive projects. And this is, this is a great question. There's it's often an element that's not looked at with sufficient detail. We tend to look at fiscal terms applying to a project as the terms that are in contracts or in law, but often there's a number of international tax elements that come into play. And one of them, a very important one, is the existence of bilateral tax treaties. And it's often a risk because in bilateral tax treaties, so two countries agree on how to separate taxing powers for residents of one country operating in another country. And these bilateral tax treaties are often signed by countries that want to have strong, more closer economic interaction and want to attract investments between the two countries. And so that leads to often lowering tax rate, especially withholding taxes for payments made from one country to residents in the other country. And if these terms are more favorable than the general legislation, or more favorable than the terms awarded to other countries that are not part of this bilateral tax treaty, then it's very likely that a lot of companies will want to take advantage of that, of those fiscal incentives by locating at least a subsidiary in the country that is part of a bilateral tax treaty with the host country. And so if you're a mining country and you sign a bilateral tax treaty with one country, thinking you're just going to attract investors from that country, what's likely to happen is that a lot of investors would otherwise have invested through, whatever their actual country of residence is, will set up subsidiary in this new partner country in order to invest in your country. So you're not actually attracting new investment with these fiscal incentives. You're just redirecting investment through the country you just signed a bilateral tax treaty with. So in terms of attracting investment, it's not always significant, but what it does is that from then on, all of your investors in the resource sector are going to have lower tax rates on dividends, interest payments, services to companies located in that jurisdiction. And so the fiscal regime that you designed when you created your mining law or you signed a contract is going to be undermined by the use of that treaty to lower some of the nominal taxes. And so you're not going to benefit and yield as much from the resources as you would. So it's something that, when negotiating tax treaties, it's something to take into consideration. What is going to be the impact in terms of the taxes that companies already present in their country and are paying, or future investors that would otherwise come from other countries, how much less they're going to pay because of the tax treaties. And so my recommendation is for countries negotiating new tax treaties or renegotiating old ones is to involve those experts in the government that are in charge of negotiating this of mining taxation, so that their point of view is integrated into the discussion of the tax treaty. And there's a number of other ways you can limit abuses of tax treaties. I mean, there are a number of model tax agreements proposed by the OECD, by the UN, by the African Tax Administration. And these tend to have clauses that limit the abuse of treaties, such as limitation of benefits. So to enjoy the benefits of the tax treaty, this provision stipulates that there's a threshold of activity in the partner country that is required to benefit from the fiscal incentives in the treaty. So these kind of provisions exist, but it's good to rely on them to avoid some of the worst losses of revenues from tax treaty projects. So I think that was all for today, but I look forward to new session and discussions, and feel free to drop me a line on the Google Hangout, send me an email. I'd be happy to answer additional questions. And I wish you good continuation of the course, and I hope you enjoy it.